for food. That's the issue. It's always about politics. So is climate change. Climate change is not going to cause your life to come to an end. It might cause polar bears to come to an end, but they won't, because they're in fact incredibly resilient. The Green Movement should not be using them as an icon. But it will certainly cause a lot of species to disappear, and it will cause New York to have a lot more rain and possibly the odd hurricane. But you know, if you're wealthy enough to afford some really nice designer boots, you're going to be fine. The people who are going to suffer live in Bangladesh and South Pacific and Africa and Australia. Why people live on the driest continent on Earth, which is Australia, I don't know. It's a beautiful place. Sorry, other question. Yep.
In the beginning, you said you had a lot in common with Susan's approach that she kind of needed to define, but you differ from it. I didn't really get where you differed from it, and I was wondering if you could elaborate.
So I differ on the one hand in that I think propaganda is much more interesting as a non-communication design strategy than as a communication design strategy.
How's that?
Every time I put a handle on a door, it is doing propaganda. It is persuading you that this is the way in which it opens. And bad design is really bad propaganda, in that you don't take it for granted. Propaganda wants you to take its message for granted. Right? So if I'm Hitler, I'm trying to convince you that certain racial stereotypes are bad. You immediately associate without thinking. And in an emergency, they're the ones you leave behind. And a door is propagandistic. A door is saying, push me in an emergency, don't even think about it. So I think it's much more interesting to think about the force of design as an interaction, as a physical interaction, through product semantics, through affordances, as Donald Norman appropriated from James Gibson. I think affordances are a much more interesting propaganda strategy right now. And it's about using these things to default sustainable behaviours. So take, for example, just that one in terms of a toilet flush, just to give a quick example of this. If you have a toilet flush, and if you make it a choice regime like that, like I'm calling that a ballot paper.
Was that product so you could choose?
Yeah, that's right. I thought you all understood it, but it's because it's an Australian innovation. So this is a half flush, this is a full flush. Now if I was a communication designer working on this, I've got a dilemma.
Why would you give them the option?
Right, absolutely. So that's one thing. The second is, well, we'll get to it in a second. So there's two ways to do this. We get this button. Normally in this country, I have the one button that's divided in half. Now, as a communication designer, I can put a sign on it. Supposedly that means full, and this means half. The other way to do it is to say, well, there's a big one and a little one. Well, the big one intuitively means big flush, and the little one means little flush. But if I design it so that this is over halfway, the person who doesn't want to even think about it, who doesn't want to run the risk of actually seeing what's inside the bowl, right, just presses like this, and invariably they'll hit the middle of the bowl. And you are choice architecturing, you are defaulting to the flush. So I can now do it in the reverse. Let's say it's actually a button one, which you kind of get in Europe, so it's like a tap. And if you press down, you get half flush. To get a full flush, you've actively got to lift it up. If by mistake you do a half flush and it's not really going anywhere, you can hit it again. But now you are actively deciding to throw these things out. The other example I sometimes show, which I think is a much better example of this, a really exquisite one, I don't know if I can find it. A really exquisite example was done by the RCA, and I showed it sort of normally when I give this talk. I won't be able to find it, I'll tell you forever. Anyway, it's really beautiful. It was done as a part of a water project, and it was a bowl, just simply a bowl that has no pipe in the bottom. So it's just a rounded bowl resting on a piece of wood. And the idea is that when you fill it up with water, in order to empty it, you roll it. It's on a round base, and you roll it. You just lift it gently, and all the water pours out the back and down the gunnel of the back. Really beautiful interaction design, beautiful affording, but very clever, because now I have to see how much water I throw out every single time. Every single time I do it, I have to actively look at how much water I'm throwing out. Don't show me water meter. Don't tell me how many kilolitres I'm using. Give me a beautiful design affordance. And that's the kind of propaganda that I think is particularly interesting. The last difference I'd make, and the big one that I haven't kind of got to, is the fact that I think the message has nothing to do with trees and green and environment and animals. I'm the chair of sustainability, but I do not care about trees and greens and animals. I care about you and people. The problem with sustainability is that it is actually a debate about how we want to live as people. It's not that I know the planet is going to be catastrophic if I do this. It's that I don't want to run the risk. It's that I don't particularly like cars. It's that I hate suburbs. I am as much a kind of right-wing bigot as the right-wing bigots. And that's what politics is about. I have to convince people for my values, not using some risky science. And that's the other way I dispute it. That it literally is not propaganda now, but a debate in which you are using the forces of propaganda. And that the theme here is not environment, but how we live.